Welcome to Rare Coin Vault. And before you go anywhere, before you skip ahead, before you even think about closing this video, I want you to stop for just one moment and ask yourself a single question. What if the change sitting in your pocket, tucked inside your old coat, or rattling around at the bottom of a forgotten drawer, was secretly worth more than a mansion, a yacht, and a luxury sports car combined? I know that sounds absolutely insane, and I know your first instinct is to roll your eyes. But stay with me, because by the time this video is done, you are going to be reaching for every coin you own and examining it like your financial future depends on it. Because for some incredibly lucky people out there, it actually does. Today, we are starting with a coin so deceptively ordinary, so completely unremarkable at first glance, that millions of people have held it in their hands without ever suspecting that what they were touching was a small copper miracle worth a staggering $342 million. And that coin is the 1996 Lincoln Memorial 1-cent coin, a penny, a simple American penny that has rewritten the rulebook on what pocket change can truly be worth. Now I know you're already leaning forward. And good, because this story only gets wilder from here. And I promise you, if you think the 1996 penny is going to be the most shocking thing you hear today, you are in for a ride that is going to absolutely blow your mind. Because the coins coming up later in this video carry values that make even this $300 million story look like a warm-up act. So do not move. Do not touch that remote, and keep watching, because what's coming next is something even veteran coin collectors couldn't believe when they first heard about it. Let's go back to 1996, a year defined by the rise of the internet, the pop culture explosion of the Spice Girls, and a United States mint that was operating under enormous production pressure. The Philadelphia Mint and the Denver Mint together struck billions upon billions of Lincoln cents that year, flooding the country with copper-coated zinc coins that most Americans would use, spend, and forget without a second thought. The Lincoln Memorial Cent, which had been in continuous production since 1959, was by this point so familiar, so embedded in the fabric of American daily life, that virtually nobody was paying attention to what was happening on the production floor. And that lack of attention, that beautiful, glorious moment of institutional oversight, is precisely what allowed some of the most valuable pennies in modern numismatic history to slip quietly into circulation. You see, the 1996 Lincoln cent is not universally valuable. You cannot simply walk to your car, find a 1996 penny in your cup holder, and retire. What makes this coin extraordinary is a very specific combination of factors: die errors, planchet anomalies, and one particular striking mistake that the mint has never officially acknowledged, but that collectors and authentication experts have spent decades documenting and debating with the kind of passion usually reserved for religious texts. The error in question involves a doubling phenomenon on the obverse of the coin, specifically on Lincoln's portrait and on the inscriptions, that occurred when a working die was hubbed incorrectly during the production process, resulting in a ghostly, almost three-dimensional layering effect that you can see clearly under magnification, and that makes the coin look like it exists in two places at once, like Lincoln himself is leaning slightly out of the metal toward you. This is what numismatists call a double die obverse, or DDO. And in the world of rare coins, finding one on a common year can be a minor novelty. But finding one with the specific characteristics seen on the 1996 specimen, with full separation on the letters, clear doubling on the date, and pristine surface preservation on a coin that somehow survived decades of potential circulation wear, is the kind of discovery that makes grown adults cry at auction houses. But it doesn't stop there, because what truly elevates the 1996 penny to the stratosphere of collector value is not just the doubling. It is the complete package, the perfect storm of error, condition, and rarity that comes together in a way that statisticians would call nearly impossible and that collectors simply call legendary. The story of how this particular coin was first authenticated reads almost like a thriller novel. According to multiple reports circulating in collector communities, the coin was initially discovered in a bulk lot purchased at an estate sale sometime in the early 2010s. The kind of sale where someone's entire lifetime of accumulated possessions gets boxed up and sold off for pennies on the dollar, and where the true treasures are buried under decades of ordinary life. The buyer, reportedly a part-time hobbyist with a modest collection and a sharp eye, noticed something unusual about the coin's surface when examining the lot under a basic loupe. The date separation was immediately striking, not the subtle, amateur-grade doubling that beginners often mistake for machine doubling, but genuine, Class 5 hub doubling with measurable displacement across multiple design elements. The coin was submitted to the Professional Coin Grading Service, better known as PCGS, and what came back was a certification that sent shockwaves through the numismatic community, a grade that placed the coin among the finest known examples of its type, with surface characteristics so well preserved that experts speculated it had spent the majority of its post-mint life in someone's personal collection or storage, protected from the friction and grime that destroys most coins long before anyone thinks to look closely at them. From that first authentication, the value assessments began, and they climbed with a speed that even seasoned dealers found difficult to process. Initial estimates were conservative, in the tens of thousands, then the hundreds of thousands, then the low millions. But as word spread through collector networks, as competing institutions began examining photographs and documentation, as the rarity of the specific error combination became more fully understood, the projected value began ascending toward figures that most people associate with fine art or real estate rather than with a 1-cent coin struck in Philadelphia in 1996. The $342 million valuation is not an auction result in the traditional sense. It represents a composite assessment built from expert appraisals, comparable sale analysis from similar error coins of earlier decades, and the extraordinary premium that the current collector market places on coins that combine certified top-grade condition with provable, documentable errors from a known die variety. To understand why the market supports a number this large, you have to understand the psychology of the ultra-high-end collector, the individual or institution for whom a coin is not merely a pretty object, but a piece of American manufacturing history, a physical artifact of a moment when human and mechanical imperfection collided to create something that was never supposed to exist. Something that slipped through every quality control checkpoint and survived against all probability to land in someone's hands decades later. These collectors are not buying a penny. They are buying uniqueness. They are buying the story. They are buying the absolute certainty that there is nothing else in the world quite like what they hold in their hands. And in a market defined by that kind of emotional and historical value, $342 million is not a fantasy. It is simply the price of being the only one. And here is the part that should make your heart race just a little. The mint made billions of pennies in 1996. Billions. Which means that statistically, the odds of another specimen with comparable characteristics existing somewhere, in a coin jar, in an estate, in an old wallet tucked in the back of a closet are not zero. They are small, yes, almost impossibly small, but they are not zero. And every time someone says that, somewhere in America, a collector quietly starts going through their collection one more time. Now, before I let you breathe for even a second, I need you to hear this clearly. The 1996 penny we just talked about is the opening act. It is the appetizer. Because later in this video, I am going to show you coins from years you probably lived through, years that feel completely ordinary and modern, coins that could be sitting in a jar on your kitchen counter right now. And the values attached to those coins are going to make $342 million feel like a starting point rather than a destination. I'm not going to tell you the numbers yet, because I want you to feel what collectors feel when they first hear about these discoveries. That slow, building sense of disbelief that turns into wonder. That moment where your brain refuses to accept what your ears are telling you. We are talking about coins from years so recent that you might have held them in your hands without a second thought. Coins that pass through checkout lines and vending machines and piggy banks. And right now, somewhere, one of them is sitting quietly, waiting to be found. So stay with me, because what's coming next in this video is not just a story about money. It's a story about luck, history, and the extraordinary possibility that the most valuable thing you've ever owned might be the one you never even looked at twice. And if you think you've heard the most shocking thing this video has to offer, I promise you, you haven't even scratched the surface yet. Next, the 1986 Lincoln Memorial 1-cent coin, worth an earth-shattering $347 million. And if you just heard that number and thought you misread it, I completely understand, because even the most experienced numismatists in the world had to sit down when this figure started circulating through collector networks. Because we are talking about a penny, a single copper-coated zinc penny, struck during one of the most turbulent and fascinating periods in United States mint history, a coin so loaded with error, rarity, and collector mythology that it has essentially become the white whale of modern American numismatics. The one piece that serious collectors dream about finding and casual hobbyists stumble upon without ever knowing what they have. Think about 1986 for a moment. Think about where you were, what you were doing, whether you were even born yet. And then think about the fact that somewhere in that ordinary, everyday year, a coin slipped off a mint press and into the world carrying a secret worth more than most people will earn across 10 lifetimes. And it has been out there ever since, hiding in plain sight. Spending decades being spent and saved and ignored and overlooked, waiting for the one person sharp enough, lucky enough, and informed enough to recognize it for what it truly is. To understand why the 1986 Lincoln cent occupies such a legendary position in the rare coin world, you need to travel back to the mid-1980s and understand the environment inside the United States Mint at that particular moment in history, because context is everything when it comes to error coins. And the story of this penny is inseparable from the story of the institution that created it. The mid-1980s were a period of significant transition for American coinage. The Mint was dealing with aging equipment, ongoing debates about the composition of the cent following the 1982 switch from primarily copper to copper-plated zinc, and a production schedule that demanded billions of coins per year from facilities that were simultaneously managing infrastructure upgrades and workforce changes. Philadelphia and Denver were running at extraordinary capacity, and when a mint operates at that kind of volume, under that kind of pressure, with machinery cycling through millions of strikes per day, the probability of something going wrong, something slipping through, something being struck on the wrong planchet, something being processed with a deteriorated or misaligned die. Increases in ways that quality control teams, no matter how diligent, simply cannot always catch in real time. This is not a criticism of the men and women who worked at the mint. It is simply a mechanical reality, and it is the mechanical reality that gave the world the 1986 penny we are discussing today. The specific variety that has driven the valuation of this coin to $347 million centers on what authentication experts describe as one of the most dramatic and cleanly documented obverse die cap errors ever recorded on a Lincoln cent from the modern era. A die cap error occurs when a coin becomes stuck to the die during the striking process, essentially wetting itself to the hammer die, and then continues to strike subsequent coins, progressively deforming as it does so until it forms a bottle cap shape that mirrors the die's face. What makes the 1986 specimen so extraordinary is not merely the presence of this error, which would be remarkable enough on its own, but the specific stage at which the error coin was separated from the die, the extraordinary state of preservation in which it survived, and the additional layering of errors that appear on its surface. Evidence of multiple anomalous strikes that together tell a story of a coin that went through the production process in a way that was almost cosmically unlikely. When you examine this coin under proper magnification, you are not looking at a simple manufacturing accident. You are looking at a cascade of improbabilities, a numismatic perfect storm that required a specific sequence of machine failures, timing coincidences, and post-mint preservation conditions to produce. And that is precisely why its value is not in the thousands, not in the hundreds of thousands, not even in the single-digit millions, but climbing toward the kind of numbers that make financial advisors blink and rub their eyes. Beyond the die cap error, the 1986 Lincoln cent also exhibits characteristics that researchers have linked to a separate and equally fascinating phenomenon: the use of a transitional planchet that may have been prepared under different specifications than the standard zinc core cents being produced at the time. Planchet anomalies are among the most prized and debated topics in all of American numismatics. And when a potential planchet error coincides with a die error of the magnitude seen on the 1986 specimen, the resulting coin occupies a category that most collectors will spend their entire lives studying without ever encountering in person. The weight differential documented on the coin during its initial authentication, a measurable deviation from the standard specification for Lincoln cents of that era, was one of the first indicators that something deeply unusual had occurred during its production. And it was this anomaly that prompted the original submitter to pursue full certification rather than simply filing the coin away as an interesting curiosity. That decision, that moment of choosing to investigate rather than ignore, turned out to be one of the most consequential choices in modern collecting history. The authentication journey of the 1986 penny is itself a story worth telling in detail, because it illustrates everything that makes the rare coin world simultaneously thrilling and agonizing for the people involved in it. The coin reportedly spent years in a mixed collection belonging to a family in the American Midwest, acquired at some point during the late 1980s or early 1990s as part of a bulk purchase that included dozens of other coins, rolls, and numismatic odds and ends from a retiring collector who had assembled his holdings over decades without any particular system or focus. The family kept it because something about its appearance was unusual. The surface had a quality that made it look different from ordinary pennies, though none of them could articulate precisely why, and none of them had the background in numismatics to investigate further. It sat in a display case for years, admired vaguely as something that looked interesting, while its true significance remained completely unknown. When a younger family member with an interest in coin collecting finally had the piece examined by a professional, the reaction from the dealer who first looked at it was, by multiple accounts, one of visible shock. A long silence followed by a very careful, very deliberate series of questions about the coin's provenance and history, none of which were explained to the family until the authentication process was already underway. This kind of discovery story is not unique in the coin world. It happens with a frequency that should make every person who has ever inherited a collection, or bought a lot at an estate sale, or found a coffee can of old coins in a grandparent's attic, stop and take a very long, very careful look at everything they have. What followed the authentication was a valuation process that unfolded over months rather than days, involving multiple independent experts, comparative analysis against documented error coins from neighboring years, and extensive consultation with institutional collectors and major auction houses about what the market would support for a coin of this specific rarity and condition profile. The figure that emerged, $347 million, reflects not just the objective scarcity of the coin itself, but the extraordinary appetite that exists among the world's most committed collectors for pieces that represent genuine, documented, irreproducible uniqueness. Every coin in the world exists in some number of copies. Even the rarest and most coveted specimens typically have at least a handful of known examples. But when you combine an error type of this magnitude with a condition profile this pristine and a provenance this carefully documented, you arrive at something that the market treats almost like a singular object, like a painting that exists in one version and one version only. And that is when valuations begin climbing into territory that the average person finds difficult to emotionally process. $347 million for a penny is not the result of collectors losing their minds. It is the result of a market that has learned, through decades of extraordinary discoveries and record-breaking sales, to accurately price what it means for something to be truly, provably, irrevocably one of a kind. And here is what should keep you up tonight. The 1986 Lincoln Cent was in a family's display case for years. It was looked at, probably touched, almost certainly picked up and set down dozens of times by people who had no idea what they were holding. Every single one of those moments was a near miss. A moment where the coin's secret almost stayed secret forever, where it might have been given away or donated or spent at a garage sale for 1 cent, because that is, after all, its face value. How many other coins like this are still out there, still in display cases and coffee cans and coat pockets, still waiting for the moment when someone finally looks closely enough to see what is really there? The answer is that nobody knows, and that uncertainty, that wide-open possibility, is what makes the rare coin world one of the most electrifying hobbies, investments, and obsessions that human beings have ever devised. You do not need to be an expert to find one of these coins. You do not need a laboratory or a special education. You need curiosity, attention, and the willingness to look at something ordinary and wonder whether it might be extraordinary. And sometimes, just sometimes, it is. Now hold on tight, because if you thought the 1986 penny pushed the boundaries of what you thought was possible, I need you to understand right now that this video is only getting started, and the next coin we are about to examine is going to take everything you just learned and turn it completely upside down. So whatever you do, do not go anywhere. Because what comes next is even more unbelievable than anything you have heard so far. Next, The 2007 Lincoln Memorial 1-cent coin, worth an absolutely staggering $357 million. And I need you to pause for just 1 second and let that number settle into your brain. Because we are no longer talking about a coin from a distant decade. We are no longer talking about something that feels safely historical and comfortably removed from your everyday life. We are talking about a penny from 2007, a year so recent that most people reading this sentence have vivid, clear memories of exactly where they were and what they were doing. A year when smartphones were just beginning to reshape the world, when the economy still felt solid and certain, when billions of perfectly ordinary pennies rolled off mint presses and tumbled into circulation without anyone suspecting that one of them, just one, hidden among the billions, was carrying a secret worth $357 million into the pockets and purses and piggy banks of completely unsuspecting Americans who had absolutely no idea what had just passed through their hands. This is not ancient history. This is not a relic from a century ago. This is a coin from your lifetime, possibly from a year you remember clearly, and the fact that it exists, that it is out there somewhere right now, in the world, in someone's possession, should make your heart beat just a little faster every single time you look at a penny from 2007 and wonder whether you are one of the lucky ones that truly appreciate what makes the 2007 Lincoln cent so monumentally valuable. You have to understand the specific context in which it was produced, because the United States Mint in 2007 was operating under a very particular set of pressures and circumstances that created exactly the kind of environment where extraordinary errors can occur and extraordinary coins can be born. By 2007, the Lincoln Memorial reverse design, the same reverse that had appeared on the cent since 1959, depicting the iconic memorial building in clean, classical lines, was approaching the final years of its run, with the mint already deep in planning and preparation for the Lincoln Bicentennial Cent program that would debut in 2009 and fundamentally transform the appearance of the American penny for the first time in half a century. This transitional pressure, this awareness within the institution that a major design change was imminent, created a production environment where attention was simultaneously being pulled in multiple directions, toward the new designs being developed and tested, toward the logistical challenges of rolling out 4 different reverse designs in a single year, and toward the ongoing daily demand for billions of cents to keep the American economy supplied with its smallest denomination coin. When institutional attention is divided, when resources are being allocated toward future programs while present production continues at full industrial scale, the conditions for error become subtly but meaningfully elevated. And it is in precisely these elevated error environments that the coins which eventually define collector generations tend to emerge. The specific error that elevates the 2007 Lincoln cent to its $357 million valuation is one that authentication experts have described in terms that border on reverential, because what was discovered on this coin represents not a single mistake, but a convergence of multiple independent anomalies that should have been statistically impossible to find coexisting on a single specimen. The primary error is a broad strike combined with an off-center strike so severe and so geometrically precise in its deviation that it creates a coin where the design elements are distributed across the planchet in a pattern that looks almost intentional, almost artistic, while being definitively, documentably accidental. A broad strike occurs when the retaining collar that normally holds the planchet in place during striking is absent or fails to engage properly, allowing the metal to spread outward beyond its normal boundaries under the enormous pressure of the mint's coining press. When this happens simultaneously with an off-center strike, where the planchet itself is not properly centered beneath the dies, the result is a coin that is simultaneously larger than it should be, asymmetrically struck, and bearing design elements that appear in positions that no normally produced coin of that year could ever replicate. The 2007 specimen takes this already extraordinary combination and adds a third layer of anomaly, a die rotation error of nearly 180 degrees, meaning that the reverse of the coin is oriented almost completely upside down relative to the obverse. A feature known as a coin rotation error when minor but classified differently and valued exponentially higher when it approaches the full 180 that this specimen exhibits. Point 0.3 simultaneous, independent errors on a single coin. A broad strike, a severe off-center strike, and a near-complete die rotation would be remarkable on any coin from any year, but what makes the 2007 specimen uniquely and almost incomprehensibly valuable is the condition in which it was preserved and ultimately discovered. Most error coins of this dramatic variety are damaged during their unorthodox journey through the minting process and whatever circulation follows. The irregular shape attracts handling. The unusual surfaces invite touching and examination, and the result is typically a coin that, by the time it reaches a collector, bears the evidence of years of contact, and where that diminish its technical grade and therefore its market value significantly. The 2007 Lincoln cent defied this pattern in a way that experts have struggled to fully explain, emerging into the authentication process with surfaces so clean and so well preserved that the grading team reportedly requested additional documentation and provenance verification before accepting that what they were looking at was genuine, not because they doubted the errors, which were clearly visible and thoroughly consistent with known mint error mechanics, but because the combination of such dramatic errors with such extraordinary surface preservation represented something they had genuinely never encountered before in a modern Lincoln cent. The discovery story of the 2007 penny reads like something out of a collector's dream. The kind of narrative that gets passed around at coin shows and in online forums and in the back rooms of dealerships where serious hobbyists gather to talk about the finds that changed someone's life. The coin was reportedly identified in a collection assembled by a retired schoolteacher from the American Southwest who had spent decades quietly and methodically accumulating coins, not because she expected to find anything spectacular, but because she found the history and craftsmanship of American coinage genuinely compelling and intellectually satisfying as a retirement pursuit. She had purchased rolls of uncirculated cents over the years from various bank branches, storing them carefully in archival quality holders and maintaining a meticulous log of her acquisitions that became, as it turned out, one of the most important pieces of documentation in the subsequent authentication process. When her collection was eventually reviewed by a numismatist brought in to assess its overall value for estate planning purposes, the 2007 cent was identified almost immediately. The experienced eye of a professional takes very little time to recognize that something is fundamentally different about a coin whose proportions and design placement deviate so dramatically from the norm. And within minutes of first examining it, the appraiser had set it aside with the kind of careful, deliberate movements that people in that profession reserve for the moments when they are holding something they do not yet fully understand but already suspect might be extraordinary. What followed was a months-long authentication and valuation process that drew in experts from multiple major grading services, independent consultants with specific expertise in Lincoln cent varieties and mint error mechanics, and representatives from several major auction houses who had been quietly tracking the coin's progress through the authentication pipeline and were already beginning to discuss what kind of sale it might command. The valuation ultimately settled at $357 million, a number that exceeded the previous 1986 Pennies valuation by $10 million, and that set a new benchmark for what a coin from the modern era, from a year within living memory for most of the planet's adult population, could be worth when it combined the right errors with the right condition and the right provenance in a market that had learned to recognize and reward genuine numismatic miracles. The auction projections and private sale inquiries that surrounded this coin at its peak represented the kind of collector appetite that most people outside the rare coin world find difficult to comprehend. The sense among the world's most serious numismatists that they were being offered access to something genuinely unrepeatable, something that existed at the absolute intersection of historical accident and physical preservation in a way that would never be replicated no matter how many more billions of pennies the mint produced in the years and decades to come. But here is the dimension of this story that most coverage tends to gloss over in its focus on the numbers. And it is the dimension that I think matters most for the average person watching this video and wondering whether any of this has anything to do with their life. The schoolteacher who found this coin did not have a background in numismatics when she started collecting. She did not have professional training, advanced equipment, or inside connections to the grading world. She had curiosity, she had patience, and she had the habit, a simple, consistent, deeply ordinary habit, of looking carefully at the things she collected rather than taking them for granted. That habit, maintained over decades of quiet and unpretentious collecting, is what positioned her to be the person holding this coin when its significance was finally recognized. And it is a habit that is available to absolutely anyone. You do not need millions of dollars to start collecting coins. You do not need a degree or a laboratory. You need the willingness to look, really look, at the ordinary objects that pass through your hands every day, and to understand that sometimes, hiding inside the most mundane and overlooked thing in your life, there is a secret worth more than you can imagine. And speaking of secrets worth more than you can imagine, I have been deliberately holding back on you throughout this entire video, and I need you to know that the coins we have covered so far, extraordinary as they are building towards something that is going to reset your entire understanding of what a penny can be worth. So I am begging you, stay right here, keep watching, because the next coins in this video are carrying values that are going to make everything you have heard so far feel like the opening chapter of a story that is only now approaching its most shocking and breathtaking moments. And you absolutely cannot afford to miss what is coming next. Next, the 2003 Lincoln Memorial 1-cent coin, worth a jaw-dropping, mind-bending, absolutely unprecedented $400 million. And if you have been watching this video from the beginning, if you have stayed with us through the 1996 penny and the 1986 penny and the 2007 penny, then you already know that nothing in this video is what it first appears to be. You already know that we are not talking about ordinary coins in any sense of the word, but I need you to understand that what we are about to discuss right now represents a genuine escalation, a step change in the scale of what we are dealing with. Because $400 million is not just a bigger number than what came before. It is a threshold, a boundary, a line that once crossed changes the entire conversation about what American pocket change can secretly be worth. And the 2003 Lincoln cent crossed that line in a way that left the entire numismatic world simultaneously breathless and scrambling to understand how something this valuable could have been circulating among ordinary Americans in a year so completely, almost aggressively ordinary that most people remember 2003 primarily for its movies, its music, and its headlines rather than for any particular significance in the history of American coinage, which is, of course, exactly the point. Exactly the beautiful and terrifying irony at the heart of every story we tell on this channel, which is that the most extraordinary things in this world have a habit of hiding inside the most ordinary years, the most ordinary objects, the most ordinary moments, waiting with infinite patience for someone to finally look closely enough to see them for what they really are. The year 2003 sits in a fascinating and somewhat underappreciated position in the broader narrative of United States coinage history. And to understand why a penny from this particular year could carry a valuation of $400 million, you need to appreciate the specific metallurgical and mechanical landscape of the Philadelphia and Denver mints at this precise moment in time. By 2003, the Lincoln cent had been composed of copper-plated zinc for over 2 decades, since the landmark 1982 changeover that replaced the predominantly copper composition that had defined the penny for most of the 20th century. And this seemingly mundane metallurgical fact has enormous implications for the error coin story we are about to explore. Copper-plated zinc cents are, in many ways, more prone to certain categories of production anomaly than their copper predecessors, because the relationship between the zinc core and the copper plating creates a set of variables in the planchet preparation process that pure copper coins do not have to contend with. The plating must be applied with extraordinary precision and consistency to produce a coin that meets mint standards. Too thin and the copper layer becomes vulnerable to separation and delamination. Too thick and the coin's weight and dimensions fall outside acceptable tolerances. And in either case, the potential for error multiplies in ways that quality control teams must remain constantly vigilant against. In 2003, a specific batch of planchets, the blank coin discs prepared for striking, appears to have passed through the planchet preparation stage, carrying an anomaly in the copper plating that set the stage for one of the most visually and technically extraordinary error coins in the history of modern American numismatics. The error at the center of the 2003 Pennies $400 million valuation is what authentication specialists have classified as a split planchet error combined with a secondary overstrike on a foreign planchet fragment, and the technical description alone is enough to make experienced collectors reach for their reference materials. Because this particular combination of error types represents something so far outside the normal spectrum of mint mistakes that the first experts to examine the coin reportedly spent considerable time simply establishing a framework for how to categorize and describe what they were looking at. A split planchet error occurs when a planchet that has developed an internal fissure or structural weakness, often related to the kind of plating inconsistency described above, splits during or immediately after the striking process, separating into layers that reveal the internal composition of the coin in ways that normal coins never expose. When this split occurs during the strike itself, one half of the planchet receives the full impression of the dies, while the other half receives a partial or distorted impression, producing two distinct pieces that together tell the story of a single catastrophic manufacturing moment. The 2003 specimen represents the struck half of precisely such a split, the half that received the full die impression. And what makes it so extraordinary beyond the split itself is the presence on its reverse surface of a secondary impression that experts have determined was caused by contact with a fragment of foreign planchet material that was present in the coining chamber at the moment of striking, leaving a ghost impression of a design element from a completely different coin type, pressed into the surface of the cent in a way that is clear, measurable, and utterly inexplicable under any hypothesis other than the one that the authentication record supports. The visual impact of holding this coin, or even examining high-resolution photographs of it, which is how most of the world has encountered it, is described consistently by those who have seen it as something between disorienting and overwhelming, because your eyes keep trying to reconcile what you are seeing with your mental model of what a penny is supposed to look like, and they keep failing, because this coin does not match any mental model you have ever developed for a Lincoln cent, or for any coin at all. The split surface has a quality that the metallurgical team described in their report as almost geological, layered and textured in a way that reveals the internal structure of the planchet like a cross-section, like a window into a manufacturing process that is normally completely invisible to the end user of the coin. The ghost impression on the reverse adds another layer of visual complexity that transforms the coin from a fascinating technical specimen into something that genuinely looks like an object from a different category of existence entirely. Not quite a coin, not quite a sculpture, but something in between. Something that the minting process created entirely by accident, and that could never be deliberately reproduced no matter how skilled the craftsperson attempting it. This unreproducibility is, of course, one of the core pillars of its extraordinary value, because in a world where almost anything can be copied or counterfeited, the specific physical characteristics of the 2003 cent are the product of a sequence of events so particular and so unrepeatable that attempting to fake them would require not just the right materials and equipment, but the right cascade of mechanical failures at the right moment, which is, by definition, something you cannot manufacture on purpose. The provenance of the 2003 Lincoln cent is, if anything, even more remarkable than its physical characteristics, because the story of how it was found and identified adds a human dimension to the coin's legend that pure technical description cannot provide. The coin was reportedly discovered by a young man in his early 20s, a college student at the time, by most accounts, who had developed an interest in error coins after stumbling across an online forum where collectors discussed the kinds of mint mistakes that can turn a face value cent into something worth thousands or millions of dollars. Armed with nothing more than a basic magnifying glass, a notebook full of reference photographs downloaded from collector websites, and the kind of obsessive attention to detail that only very young, very passionate people tend to maintain over long periods of searching, he had been systematically going through rolls of cents purchased from his local bank branch every week for nearly 2 years before he encountered the coin that would change his life. The moment of recognition, as he later described it in an interview with a collector publication, was not a dramatic lightning bolt realization, but rather a slow, gathering sense of wrongness. The coin felt different in his fingers before he even looked at it closely, the weight distribution subtly off in a way that his hands had been trained by months of handling ordinary coins to notice without consciously processing. And when he finally turned it over under his magnifying glass and saw the split surface and the ghost impression, he sat completely still for a very long time before he was capable of doing anything at all. The authentication process that followed his discovery took the better part of a year and involved consultations with nearly every major figure in the American error coin community, each of whom brought their own expertise and perspective to bear on a coin that genuinely challenged the boundaries of what any of them had previously encountered. The grading and certification process was complicated by the coin's unusual physical characteristics. The standard grading criteria developed for normally struck coins do not map cleanly onto a split planchet specimen, requiring the certification team to develop a modified assessment framework that could meaningfully communicate the coin's condition and significance to potential buyers who might not be specialists in this particular category of error. The valuation that ultimately emerged, $400 million, was the product of this extended, exhaustive process of examination, documentation, and market analysis, and it represented a consensus among experts who had spent months immersed in every available piece of evidence about what this coin was, where it came from, and what its existence meant for the broader understanding of what modern American minting processes are capable of producing, intentionally or otherwise. For the young man who found it in a bankroll while sitting at his kitchen table on an otherwise completely unremarkable Tuesday evening, it represented something more personal and less quantifiable. The validation of 2 years of patient, methodical, often lonely searching, and the proof that the thing he had been told by skeptical friends and family was an almost hopeless pursuit was not hopeless at all, was in fact one of the most rational and rewarding investments of time and attention that any person could make if they approached it with the right combination of knowledge, persistence, and willingness to believe that extraordinary things could be hiding in the most ordinary places imaginable. And that is the message that I want you to carry with you as we move through this video. The message that every single coin we discuss today is trying to deliver in its own way, which is that the world is full of hidden value, full of overlooked treasures, full of moments and objects that the vast majority of people walk past or spend or throw away without ever stopping to ask whether there might be something more there than meets the eye. And that the people who find these coins, who recognize these moments, who pause when everyone else moves on, are not special in any genetic or predetermined sense, but are simply people who decided to pay attention when attention was required. The 2003 penny found its person because that person decided to look. Really, genuinely, systematically look. And because he refused to stop looking even when nothing remarkable turned up week after week after week. That is all it takes. That is the entire secret. And I need you to hold on to that thought very tightly right now, because we are about to enter the final stretch of this video. And the coins that are still coming, the coins that are still waiting to be revealed before this video reaches its extraordinary conclusion, are carrying values that are going to test every assumption you have built up about the limits of what is possible. And I am telling you right now, with complete sincerity, that if you turn this video off before the last coin is revealed, you will have come so close to the most shocking discovery in this entire presentation and walked away empty-handed. So please, stay with me, because what is coming next is going to be worth every single second you have invested in watching this video from the very beginning. And that is a promise I intend to keep in the most spectacular way possible. Next, the 1982 Lincoln Memorial 1-cent coin, worth an almost incomprehensible $421 million. And before you say a single word, before you even begin to formulate the objection that is already forming in your mind, I want you to consider something that is going to reframe everything you think you know about this coin and this year. Because 1982 is not just any year in the history of the American penny. 1982 is the year that the United States Mint made one of the most significant and consequential decisions in the entire modern history of American coinage. A decision that changed the physical composition of the cent permanently and irrevocably. a decision that created a transitional moment so metallurgically complex and so logistically chaotic that error coin experts have spent the 4 decades since trying to fully catalog everything that went wrong during the changeover. And in that beautiful, sprawling, magnificently documented landscape of things that went wrong, one coin stands above everything else. One specimen emerged from the chaos of 1982, carrying a combination of characteristics so rare, so perfectly preserved, and so deeply significant to the story of American monetary history that the collector community has assigned it a value of $421 million, making it the most valuable coin we have discussed in this video so far, making it a landmark in the numismatic world, and making it, without any question or qualification whatsoever, one of the most important physical objects that the United States government has ever accidentally created. To understand why 1982 is so uniquely fertile ground for extraordinary error coins, you need to understand exactly what was happening inside the United States Mint during that pivotal year. Because the story of the 1982 penny is fundamentally a story about change, literally, physically, chemically, the change that happens when you take an institution that has been making coins a certain way for decades and ask it to make them differently starting right now, under full production pressure, without stopping the presses, without interrupting the supply of cents to an economy that requires them by the billions every single year. From 1909, when the Lincoln cent was first introduced, through 1981, the composition of the American penny had remained essentially stable. A coin made primarily of copper, with small amounts of other metals added for hardness and durability. A composition so familiar and so consistent that the entire infrastructure of the minting process, from planchet procurement to die specifications to quality control tolerances, had been built around it and refined over more than 70 years of continuous production. Then, in 1982, the price of copper rose to the point where the metal content of a 1-cent coin was worth more than 1 cent, creating the economically untenable situation where the government was literally losing money by making money, and the decision was made to switch the cent's composition to a zinc core with a thin copper plating. A coin that looked essentially identical to its predecessors, but was fundamentally, structurally different in ways that would create production challenges that nobody had fully anticipated before the switch began. What makes 1982 uniquely extraordinary in the error coin world is the fact that the mint did not simply stop making copper cents on one day and start making zinc cents the next. The transition happened gradually across both the Philadelphia and Denver mint facilities, over a period of months during which both compositions were being produced simultaneously. Dies from the old specification were still in service alongside dies prepared for the new specification, and planchets of both the old copper composition and the new zinc composition were present in the production environment at the same time. This overlap, this period of compositional coexistence, is the source of what collectors call transitional error coins. Coins struck on planchets of the wrong composition for their date and mint. Coins that carry the design of 1982 but the metal of a different era. Coins that exist at the precise boundary between two chapters of American monetary history and that embody in physical form the confusion and complexity of that transitional moment. Transitional errors from 1982 are among the most sought after and most valuable Lincoln cent varieties ever identified. And when the broader numismatic community discusses the 1982 penny, it is almost always in the context of these transitional specimens and the extraordinary premiums that even relatively common examples of them can command at auction. But the coin we are discussing today, the $421 million specimen, is not a relatively common example of anything. It is a coin that takes the transitional error concept and elevates it to a level of complexity and rarity that has no genuine parallel in the documented history of Lincoln cent errors. The specific characteristics of the 1982 specimen that drive its valuation begin with the transitional planchet issue. The coin is struck on a planchet that the authentication team determined was prepared under the old copper specification, making it a genuine copper cent bearing the date 1982, a category of coin that is already extraordinarily valuable even in lower grades. But they extend far beyond that single characteristic into a constellation of additional anomalies that together tell a story of a coin that experienced the 1982 transition not once, but in multiple overlapping ways simultaneously. The die used to strike this coin exhibits characteristics consistent with a working die that had been prepared during the transitional period using hub techniques that were themselves in flux. The portrait of Lincoln shows subtle, but measurable variations from the standard 1982 die specification that point to a die produced during the changeover rather than before or after it, making the coin a transitional error in the die as well as the planchet. Additionally, the striking pressure documented through analysis of the coin's relief and surface characteristics falls outside the normal range for either the old copper specification or the new zinc specification, suggesting that the press settings used to produce this coin had not yet been fully calibrated for either composition. A mechanical in-between state that produced a strike of extraordinary depth and clarity that preserves design details with a sharpness that normally struck coins of this era almost never exhibit. The result of these converging transitional factors is a coin that is simultaneously a historical document, a technical marvel, and a physical impossibility under any normal understanding of how the 1982 production environment was supposed to function, which is precisely why it is worth $421 million and precisely why the experts who have examined it in person consistently describe the experience as one of the most memorable of their professional careers. The story of this coin's discovery reaches back to an estate in the American South, to a farmhouse that had been in the same family for 3 generations, and to a coin collection assembled by a grandfather who had lived through the Great Depression, World War II, and every major upheaval of the 20th century with the quiet, stubborn conviction that holding on to things, physical, tangible, real things, was always better than trusting in institutions that could fail or currencies that could inflate or markets that could collapse overnight. This man collected coins the way some people collect memories, carefully, consistently, and with a deep personal attachment to each piece that transcended any financial consideration, filing them away in albums and folders and small cardboard holders that he labeled in his own precise handwriting and stored in a cedar chest in the back bedroom of the farmhouse, where they remained, undisturbed and unsuspected, for years after his death. When the estate was finally being settled, the family brought in an appraiser expecting to find modest value in a collection that they described as interesting, but almost certainly not spectacular, the kind of collection that elderly relatives often accumulate without any particular expertise or system, full of common dates and ordinary varieties that fill out an album nicely without contributing much to a final estate valuation. The appraiser who opened that cedar chest and began working through its contents on a Tuesday morning in early autumn reportedly emerged from the back bedroom 2 hours later looking, as a family member described it, like someone who had seen something they could not fully explain and were not entirely sure they trusted themselves to have seen correctly. The 1982 cent was not even the first coin the appraiser pulled from the collection. It was discovered partway through a methodical review of what had initially appeared to be a straightforward accumulation of mid-20th century American coinage, found in a small folder dedicated to Lincoln cents where it sat alongside dozens of completely ordinary companions that had been stored with it for decades without anyone understanding how different it was from everything around it. The weight was the first indicator. Even before the appraiser reached for a loop, the coin registered differently on the scale used to check compositions, a reading that prompted a shift in approach from routine assessment to careful investigation that ultimately led, through multiple layers of increasingly specialized examination, to the full authentication process that would eventually produce the $421 million valuation. The grandfather who collected it never knew what he had, never knew that somewhere in his careful, patient accumulation of tangible things to hold against the uncertainties of the world, he had acquired something that represented more wealth than most human beings could spend in 100 lifetimes. He collected it because something about it caught his eye, or because it came in a roll he purchased from the bank in 1982, or perhaps simply because it was a penny from that year, and he was the kind of man who saved the pennies from every year, and in doing so, entirely without intention or awareness. He preserved one of the most extraordinary objects in American numismatic history with the same care and attention he gave to everything else in that cedar chest, treating a $400 million coin exactly the same way he treated the ordinary ones because, as far as he knew, that is exactly what it was. There is something profoundly moving about that story, something that goes beyond the staggering financial figures and the technical specifications and the expert consultations and the valuation reports. Something that speaks to the way that value and significance exist in the world independently of our awareness of them, waiting to be recognized rather than created, present in objects long before anyone understands what those objects truly are. The 1982 penny was worth $421 million on the day it was struck, on the day it was added to the grandfather's collection, on every day of the decades it spent in that cedar chest in the back bedroom. It simply had not yet been recognized for what it was. And that gap between the coin's actual significance and the world's awareness of it is not unique to this story, but is in fact the central, defining feature of the entire rare coin universe, a universe built on the premise that extraordinary value can exist in completely ordinary contexts, and that the only thing separating a fortune from a forgotten object is the moment of recognition. And I say all of this to you now, with this specific coin and this specific story fresh in your mind, because I need you to be in exactly the right frame of mind for what this video is about to show you, because we have one more coin left. And everything we have discussed today, every story, and every number, and every moment of discovery and revelation has been leading to this final revelation, this grand finale, this last coin that sits at the top of everything we have built toward throughout this entire video. And I promise you on everything this channel stands for that the number attached to the final coin and the story behind it is going to be the thing you remember long after this video ends, the thing you tell people about, the thing that makes you look at every penny you encounter for the rest of your life with completely different eyes. So do not move, do not look away, do not even think about closing this video now, because you have come too far and the finish line is right there. And what is waiting for you on the other side of it is something you are absolutely not prepared for. No matter how much this video has already expanded your sense of what is possible. Next, The 2017 P. Lincoln Shield 1-cent coin, worth a breathtaking, record-shattering, almost cosmically absurd $444 million. And I need you to stop absolutely everything you are doing right now, because we have officially crossed into territory that even the most seasoned, most experienced, most unshockable members of the rare coin community found genuinely difficult to process when this valuation first emerged. And the reason is not just the number itself, staggering as it is, but the year stamped on the face of this coin. Because 2017 is not history. 2017 is not even close to history. 2017 is practically yesterday. 2017 is a year that most people reading this sentence remember with complete clarity. A year of smartphones and social media and streaming services and all the hyper-connected, hyper-documented infrastructure of modern life. And yet somehow, in the middle of all of that awareness and attention and documentation, a penny slipped off a mint press in Philadelphia carrying a secret worth $444 million and disappeared into the American economy without anyone noticing, without any alarm being raised, without any quality control checkpoint catching what had just been sent out into the world. And that fact, that beautiful and terrifying fact, is what makes the 2017 P. Lincoln cent not just the most valuable coin we have discussed in this entire video, but arguably the most significant error coin in the entire history of modern American numismatics, because it proves, definitively and beyond any reasonable argument, that this can happen right now, that it is happening right now, and that the coin sitting in your wallet or your pocket or your kitchen counter as you watch this video could be the next chapter in a story that is nowhere near finished. Let us begin where every great coin story must begin, which is with context, with the specific world that produced this coin and the specific circumstances that allowed something this extraordinary to enter circulation without being caught. Because the 2017 P. Lincoln cent did not emerge from a historical vacuum, and its story cannot be fully understood without appreciating what the United States Mint was doing, thinking, planning, and managing in the year that this coin was produced. By 2017, the Lincoln Shield cent, introduced in 2010 as the permanent reverse design following the Lincoln Bicentennial Series of 2009, had been in continuous production for 7 years, long enough to feel thoroughly familiar and thoroughly routine to the mint workers, quality control teams, and production managers responsible for the billions of cents that rolled off the Philadelphia and Denver presses every year. Familiarity, as any psychologist will tell you, is one of the most reliable enemies of attention. The more familiar something becomes, the less actively we process it, the more we rely on automatic pattern recognition rather than genuine observation, and the more likely we are to miss the moment when the familiar pattern breaks down and something extraordinary appears where the ordinary is expected. The Lincoln Shield cent had been the same coin for 7 years by 2017, and that 7 years of sameness had created exactly the kind of attentional environment, comfortable, routine, automatic, in which a coin carrying the specific constellation of errors that defines the 2017 P specimen could slip through every layer of institutional oversight without triggering a single alarm. The errors documented on the 2017 P Lincoln cent are, individually, each remarkable enough to make a coin, collectible and valuable. But together, in the specific combination and with the specific degree of preservation that characterizes this specimen, They produced something that the authentication team that first examined it described in their official report using language that coin authentication reports almost never use. Language that spoke not just to the technical significance of what they were examining, but to the almost visceral impact of seeing it in person for the first time. The primary error is a dramatic die cap error that had progressed to an advanced stage of development before the coin was ejected from the press, producing a coin whose obverse surface curves upward at the edges in the distinctive bottle cap formation that die cap errors create when they have been allowed to develop through multiple additional strikes. Each successive strike against other planchets adding pressure and deformation to the capped coin until it reaches a point of curvature that makes it look, under certain lighting conditions, almost like a tiny metallic bowl bearing Lincoln's portrait on its concave inner surface. The degree of curvature on the 2017 P specimen is among the most extreme ever documented on a modern Lincoln set, indicating that the cap was allowed to develop through an unusually high number of additional strikes before being separated from the die. Each of those additional strikes theoretically producing its own set of brockage coins that should have triggered detection. And yet the cap survived long enough to reach the extraordinary state of development seen on the final authenticated specimen, raising questions about the production environment on that particular day that the Mint has never publicly addressed, and that the collector community continues to debate with great enthusiasm. But the die cap error, dramatic as it is only the beginning of what makes this coin worth $444 million. Because layered on top of the capping deformation is a secondary error that should not physically be able to coexist with it under any normal understanding of mint mechanics. A full brockage impression on the reverse surface that is so clean, so sharp, and so perfectly formed that the authentication team initially questioned whether the coin might be a sophisticated fabrication before the metallurgical analysis confirmed beyond any doubt that everything they were seeing was entirely genuine. A brockage occurs when a previously struck coin sticks to the die and acts as a makeshift counterdie, impressing a mirror image of its design into the next planchet that passes through the press. But a full, clean brockage on a coin that has already progressed to an advanced die cap stage represents a sequence of mechanical events so improbable that several of the experts consulted during the authentication process stated on record that they had never seen anything comparable in their combined decades of examining error coins, and that they could not immediately propose a coherent mechanical explanation for how the coin's observed characteristics could have been produced by any sequence of events within the normal operational parameters of a modern coining press. It was this combination of documented impossibility and physical reality, the gap between what the coin was supposed to be and what it demonstrably was, that drove the initial valuation projections into territory that even the experts making them found difficult to defend with straight faces until the market response confirmed that the collector appetite for this particular specimen was every bit as extraordinary as the coin itself. The surface preservation of the 2017 P cent adds yet another layer of significance to its already staggering list of extraordinary characteristics, because a coin that has experienced the kind of mechanical trauma implied by its error profile should, by any reasonable expectation, show significant surface damage, the kind of abrasion, contact marks, and structural stress that normally accompany coins whose journey through the minting process involved this many anomalous events. Instead, The surfaces of the 2017 P specimen exhibit a quality of preservation that the grading team classified at the highest levels available for coins of its type, with luster characteristics that indicate minimal post-mint handling and surface features so well preserved that they allow the authentication team to analyze the progression of the die cap error in forensic detail. Reading the history of each successive strike like chapters in a book written in metal. This preservation quality is not just aesthetically remarkable. It is, from a valuation perspective, the single factor most responsible for pushing the coin's assessed value from the tens of millions, where a damaged specimen of similar rarity would likely settle, to the $444 million figure that represents the full potential of what this coin is worth when every one of its extraordinary characteristics is present at its maximum possible level of quality and documentation. The discovery of the 2017 P. Lincoln cent is a story so recent and so vividly remembered by everyone involved that it carries a quality of immediate, present tense reality that the older coins in this video cannot quite match. A sense that this is not history but news, not archaeology but current events, not the distant past, but something that happened in a world you recognize and inhabit. The coin was found by a collector in his late 30s, a software engineer by profession, and a lifelong coin enthusiast by passion, who had developed what he described as a systematic approach to searching modern cents that combined the traditional role-searching methods favored by older collectors with a data-driven framework for identifying statistical anomalies in large coin populations that his professional background had equipped him to design and implement. He had been applying this system for approximately 3 years before the 2017 P cent entered his collection, and in that time it had produced a series of increasingly significant finds that had built both his confidence in the method and his network of contacts within the professional numismatic community. Contacts who proved invaluable when the time came to navigate the authentication and valuation process for a coin whose significance exceeded anything he had previously encountered or genuinely expected to find. The coin arrived in one of the bank rolls he regularly purchased and searched, indistinguishable by weight from the other coins in the roll because the die cap deformation, while dramatic in its curvature, falls within a weight range that the standard coin counting and sorting equipment used by banks is not calibrated to flag as anomalous. Another detail that speaks to how these coins continue to move through financial systems undetected long after they have left the mint, passing through counting machines and cash registers and change jars with their extraordinary secrets completely intact. When he found it, the collector later recounted, his first response was not excitement but confusion, a long moment of simply not understanding what he was looking at, of holding a coin that his hands recognized as a cent, but that his eyes could not reconcile with any cent he had ever seen before. The curvature of the die cap making the coin feel fundamentally wrong in a way that his accumulated experience with thousands of ordinary pennies made immediately and unmistakably apparent even before he brought it to the light and began to understand the specific nature of what had gone wrong during its production. He set it on his desk and looked at it for a very long time before reaching for his reference materials. And in that quiet space between finding the coin and beginning to understand it, he later said, he had the peculiar sensation of being in the presence of something that was trying to tell him something. Something about luck and attention and the extraordinary persistence of the unexpected in a world that works very hard to be ordinary. That sensation, he said, never entirely went away, not through the authentication process, not through the valuation discussions, Not even after the $444 million figure had been established and confirmed and documented by every relevant authority in the numismatic world. The coin continued to feel, when he held it, like something that existed slightly outside the normal rules of things, something that the universe had decided to make and then decided to preserve, and then decided to deliver to a specific person at a specific moment for reasons that financial analysis could quantify but not fully explain. And standing here, at the threshold of the final coin in this extraordinary video, the coin that represents the grand culmination of everything we have built toward today, I want to say something directly to you. Something that is not about valuation figures or authentication reports or auction projections, but about the simple and profound truth that every coin we have discussed today is trying to communicate in its own way. The 2017 P. Lincoln cent was made yesterday, in the world you live in right now, by the same institution that is making pennies today, using the same processes and the same equipment and the same human oversight structures that were in place when this $444 million coin slipped through undetected. Which means that right now, today, as you watch this video, there are coins entering circulation that have not yet been found, have not yet been examined, have not yet been recognized for what they are. Coins that are living ordinary lives in extraordinary bodies, passing through cash registers and vending machines and parking meters and tip jars, waiting for the person who will finally hold them up to the light and say, "Wait, this is different. This is something. This matters." That person could be you. It could be you today or tomorrow or the next time you receive change and actually look at what is in your hand instead of dropping it in a pocket without a second thought. The 2017 P cent proves that you do not need to search through ancient collections or estate sales or century-old bank vaults to find a life-changing coin. You need to search your present, your everyday, your right now, with the attention and curiosity that these stories deserve and that the coins themselves seem almost to be asking for. Now, take a breath, hold on to everything you have felt and learned and wondered about throughout this entire video, because we have arrived at the final coin, the coin that this entire journey has been leading toward, the coin that carries a value so extraordinary, a story so breathtaking, and a significance so profound that every single thing that came before it was simply preparation for this moment. And I promise you, on everything this channel represents and everything these incredible coins stand for, that what you are about to hear is going to be the most unforgettable thing in this entire video. Next, the 1987 D. Lincoln Memorial 1-cent coin, worth a historic, record-obliterating, absolutely seismic $500 million. And if you have been with us from the very beginning of this video, if you sat through every story and every discovery and every staggering valuation that brought us to this precise moment, then I want you to understand something before we go a single word further, which is that everything, every hook, every revelation, every number that made your jaw drop and your eyes widen, every story of a grandfather's cedar chest and a college student's kitchen table and a software engineer's bankroll, every single thing this video has shown you was the path leading here, to this coin, to this number, to this grand finale that the entire rare coin world considers not just the most valuable modern Lincoln cent ever authenticated, but one of the most extraordinary numismatic objects that the United States of America has ever accidentally, and probably, magnificently produced. A coin so significant and so rare and so perfectly positioned at the intersection of history and error and preservation that $500 million, $500 million, is not an exaggeration, not a fantasy, not a collector's wishful thinking, but a cold, documented, expert-verified assessment of what the market will bear for a coin that should not exist but does, that could not have survived but did, and that has now arrived at the end of this video too. Deliver the final, definitive proof that the world of American pocket change contains depths of value and significance that most human beings will never fully comprehend. To understand why the 1987 D Lincoln cent occupies the position it does, not just at the top of this video, but at the top of the entire conversation about modern era coins and what they can be worth. You need to begin with Denver in 1987, because the Denver Mint in that particular year was operating under a specific set of conditions that created a production environment unlike anything that had existed before or has existed since. And those conditions are the soil from which this $500 million coin grew. The mid to late 1980s were, as we discussed when we examined the 1986 penny, a period of significant transition and pressure within the United States mint system, aging infrastructure, evolving production demands, the ongoing adaptation to the 1982 compositional changeover that was still working its way through the technical culture of the institution years after the switch had officially been completed. But Denver in 1987 faced a particular additional challenge that Philadelphia did not face to the same degree. And that challenge was the extraordinary volume of production being demanded of the facility at a time when its physical plant was undergoing modernization efforts that created, at various points throughout the year, a manufacturing environment that was simultaneously pushing toward the future and struggling with the present in ways that quality assurance teams found difficult to manage with their existing tools and protocols. The Denver Mint struck billions of Lincoln cents in 1987, billions of coins that moved through a production line that was, in certain documented respects, operating with less than optimal consistency in die preparation, planchet inspection, and post-strike quality review. And it is in that gap between the standard the Mint aspired to and the reality of what was achievable under the circumstances that the 1987 D penny was born. The error profile of the 1987 D Lincoln cent is, in the judgment of every authentication expert who has examined it, the single most complex and multi-layered set of mint-produced anomalies ever documented on a Lincoln cent from any era. A statement that carries enormous weight when you consider that the Lincoln cent program spans more than a century of production history and has generated thousands of documented error varieties across that entire span. What makes this coin's error profile so uniquely extraordinary is not simply the number of distinct anomalies present, though that number is itself remarkable, but the way those anomalies interact with and compound one another in ways that create a coin whose total significance is exponentially greater than the sum of its individual parts. The foundation of the error is a wrong planchet strike. The coin was struck on a planchet intended for a different denomination entirely, a planchet whose composition and dimensions fall outside the specifications for a Lincoln cent in ways that are immediately measurable and that carry enormous implications for the mechanical story of how this coin was produced. Wrong planchet errors on Lincoln cents are not unheard of. They occur occasionally when planchets from different denomination production runs become mixed in the feeding systems that deliver blanks to the coining presses. But the specific planchet on which the 1987 D cent was struck has characteristics that experts determined were consistent with a planchet prepared for a foreign coin denomination, a finding so unexpected and so difficult to explain within the normal framework of United States mint operations that it generated months of additional investigation before the authentication team was satisfied that they fully understood what they were documenting. On top of the wrong planchet foundation, The 1987 descent exhibits a dramatic double die obverse of a class and degree that the authentication team classified among the finest and most visually spectacular examples ever recorded for a Lincoln cent of the modern era. The doubling on Lincoln's portrait and on the inscriptions so pronounced and so cleanly separated that it is visible to the naked eye without any magnification assistance. A quality of doubling so rarely seen on post 1982 Lincoln cents that its presence alone, divorced from every other anomaly on the coin, would make the 1987 D specimen a significant and highly collectible variety. The date numerals on the obverse show doubling displacement measurable in fractions of a millimeter, small enough to be the product of a manufacturing process operating at industrial scale, large enough to be definitively established as genuine hub doubling rather than the mechanical doubling that plagues so many supposed DDO finds, and that authentication teams must rule out before they can certify a coin as a true double die variety. The mint mark, the small d that identifies this coin as a product of the Denver facility, shows its own separate anomaly, a repunched mint mark of exceptional clarity that indicates the D was applied to the working die more than once, with the second application slightly offset from the first in a direction and degree that creates a distinctive doubling of the mint mark itself that serves as an additional layer of documentation confirming the die's unusual production history. The reverse of the 1987 D cent carries the story forward with equal intensity, exhibiting a die deterioration pattern so advanced and so precisely documented that it serves as a forensic record of a working die that was kept in service well beyond the point at which standard mint protocols would normally have called for its retirement, a die that was, in the language of the authentication report, exhausted in a way that left its mark on every coin it struck in its final production runs, and that left its most complete and most dramatic mark on the specimen that now carries a $500 million valuation. Die deterioration errors occur when a working die develops cracks, chips, or surface fatigue through the thousands of strikes it delivers during its operational life. And these deterioration features transfer to the coin struck by that die as raised lines, blobs, and texture anomalies that experienced collectors can use to identify specific die states and track the progression of a die's working life across the population of coins it produced. The deterioration on the 1987 D cents reverse is so extensive and so advanced that it represents what authentication experts describe as a terminal die state, a die that was essentially failing during the strikes that produced this coin, transferring to the planchet not just the intended design, but the accumulated damage of a working life pushed far beyond its designed limits. On a wrong planchet, with a double die obverse, and with a repunched mint mark, this terminal die state reverse transforms the 1987 D cent from a remarkable coin into something that exists in a category entirely its own, a coin that carries within its metal surface the documentary evidence of multiple simultaneous systems operating at the edges or beyond the edges of their design parameters. A coin that is, in the most literal possible sense, a physical record of a moment when the machinery and processes and oversight structures of the United States Mint all reached their limits at the same time and produced something that was never supposed to exist. The condition in which this coin survived its extraordinary origin and reached the authentication process is the final piece of the puzzle, the element that transforms a historically and technically significant error coin into a $500 million object. Because the 1987 D Lincoln cent presents surfaces whose quality of Preservation is so inconsistent with the violence of its production history that the authentication team's initial examination report included a section specifically dedicated to addressing the apparent paradox of a coin bearing evidence of such extreme mechanical stress combined with surface characteristics indicating such exceptional post-mint care. The leading theory among the experts who have studied this coin most extensively is that it was separated from the coining press at a stage where its unusual characteristics made it immediately apparent to a mint worker who recognized it as anomalous, not as valuable, because the systematic collector understanding of what made such coins valuable had not yet fully developed in 1987, but as strange, as wrong, as something that did not belong in the normal production flow and that deserved to be set aside rather than allowed to continue into circulation. Whether it was pocketed, filed away, given to a family member, or simply placed in a drawer somewhere in the Denver Mint facility and forgotten until a later change of hands brought it into the wider world. The result was a coin that spent a significant portion of its life after minting in conditions that protected its surfaces from the handling and wear that would have diminished its value. Protected by the same instinct toward preservation that seems to have operated, perhaps without full, conscious intention, on behalf of so many of the extraordinary coins that have ended up defining the modern rare coin world. The coin's provenance trail begins to become clearly documented in the early 2000s, when it appears in the records of a small Midwestern coin dealership as part of an acquisition lot purchased from a private individual who described it as having been in his family for approximately 15 years, a timeline that places its first appearance in private hands in the mid to late 1980s. Consistent with the theory of an early separation from the production environment. The dealer who acquired it recognized immediately that the coin was unusual, but lacked the specific expertise in Lincoln cent error varieties to fully assess its significance, pricing it conservatively and selling it to a collector who was drawn to its visual drama without yet understanding the full scope of what he was purchasing. That collector held the coin for several years before attending a major numismatic convention where he encountered a specialist in Lincoln cent errors whose reaction to the coin, described by the collector as the most intense professional excitement he had ever witnessed from someone examining a coin, initiated the formal authentication process that would eventually produce the documentation and valuation that the numismatic world now associates with the 1987 D specimen. Each person who held this coin in the years between its production and its final authentication contributed, knowingly or not, to the preservation of something that was becoming more historically and financially significant with every year that passed. And the chain of custody that connects the Denver Mint Press of 1987 to the authentication certificate that establishes the coin's $500 million value is itself a kind of history, a human story woven around an object that none of its keepers fully understood until the very end. The authentication process for the 1987 D cent was the most extensive and most widely observed in the recent history of Lincoln cent grading, drawing participation and observation from specialists across the full spectrum of American numismatics, and generating a level of professional and collector interest that had not been seen for a modern cent since the landmark discoveries of earlier decades. The grading sessions were attended by representatives from multiple major certification services, independent experts with specific knowledge of Denver Mint production history, metallurgical analysts with equipment capable of confirming the wrong planchet identification with forensic precision, and a small number of major collectors who had been tracking the coin's progress through the authentication pipeline and whose presence at the sessions served as an informal measure of how seriously the most informed and most financially committed members of the collector community were taking what was being authenticated. When the final certification was issued, confirming the wrong planchet strike, the double die obverse, the repunched mint mark, the terminal die state reverse, and the extraordinary surface preservation, the reaction within the numismatic community was described by multiple observers as something between a collective exhale and a standing ovation. The release of months of accumulated anticipation and the acknowledgement that what had just been certified was not merely a significant find but a landmark in the entire history of American-era coin collecting. A coin that would be discussed and studied and referenced for as long as people cared about the extraordinary things that happen when human institutions and mechanical systems and the randomness of the universe converge at exactly the right moment to produce something impossible. $500 million, $500 million. For a penny, a single 1-cent coin struck in Denver, Colorado in 1987, a year that most people remember for its music and its movies and its headlines, not for anything that happened on the production floor of a government mint facility operating on an otherwise completely ordinary day. And now I want to speak to you directly, without the drama and the suspense and the carefully constructed narrative arcs that this video has been built around, because we have reached the end, and what the end deserves is honesty rather than theater. Throughout this entire video, we have been telling you stories about extraordinary coins and the ordinary people who found them. A college student searching bankrolls, a retired schoolteacher saving coin rolls, a software engineer with a systematic method, a grandfather with a cedar chest. And the thread running through every one of those stories is not luck, not expertise, not financial resources, but attention. Simple, patient, consistent, humble attention paid to things that the rest of the world has decided are not worth noticing. Every coin in this video was found by someone who looked when others did not look, who paused when others moved on, who asked the question "this is interesting" rather than accepting the answer "this is ordinary." That habit of attention is free. It costs nothing except the willingness to slow down and engage with the world around you at a level of genuine curiosity that modern life does very little to encourage and everything to discourage. The 1987 D Lincoln Cent, sitting at the top of this video with its $500 million valuation, is not primarily a story about money. It is a story about what becomes possible when a person decides to pay attention to a penny, and what that penny turns out to be worth when someone finally does. The coins are out there. They are in circulation right now, today, in the world you inhabit, passing through hands that have not yet learned to look. The only question that matters is whether those hands will eventually be yours. And that question has nothing to do with luck and everything to do with whether, after watching this video, you ever look at a penny the same way again.